Among all of the mysteries regarding our ancient past, I have truly never come across a single artifact or object quite like this, that seemingly appears in almost every major ancient culture. However, for what the vast majority of established archaeologists claim to be a coincidence, I believe there is in fact an object that, almost without fail, shows up again and again in virtually the same form across numerous ancient cultures. The depiction I am referring to is none other than the handbag mystery. But please do not let it fool you, because although the handbag appears as nothing more than a simple carving or description in most ancient cultures, when it is taken out of a local context, the mystery of this ancient object and its depictions, from my perspective, demonstrate a clear symbolical and cultural connection across time and all over the globe. Not only does it defy explanation through its clear and distinct physical appearance all over the world, but its mythological and symbolic interpretations are shockingly similar across the majority of these ancient cultures. When asked to explain why these striking parallels continue to emerge, the majority of modern academia, more often than not, simply scoff at the idea that any of it means anything. From my perspective, this is a problem, as in many other cases similar to this one that seem to defy our understanding of the current human timeline, it is very rarely adequately discussed, and it is never truly explained. My name is Matthew, and in this episode, we will be discussing this handbag mystery with the kind of detail that I don't think has ever truly been demonstrated before. Rest assured, because for all of you who have not heard of this handbag mystery before, this video is for you too. And I am certain that if you watch this video until the end with an open mind, you will come away with many questions and a real curiosity regarding both the handbag mystery and the many more unexplained anomalies intertwined into the bigger picture that surrounds it. So without further ado, this is the enigmatic handbag mystery. So one of the first things I mentioned in the intro was that this handbag has appeared in almost every major ancient culture in a number of different modalities. And there's a good chance that many of the examples I'm about to list you've probably never heard about before. But it is crucial that we clearly demonstrate just how widespread this really is. The shape of the handbag itself is relatively simple. It appears consistently in the form of a rectangular or trapezoidal lower body, with an arched or rounded handle above it. Now, that symbol could easily mean a number of different things if you're only focused on the local context, but when taken to a much larger scale, certain patterns begin to emerge. The first, and possibly the most monumental location where this handbag appears, is none other than Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Göbekli Tepe dates from roughly 9,600 to 8,000 BCE. It is without question the oldest confirmed megalithic construction site in the world. A detail that will be important to note for the remainder of the video is that the most important parts at Göbekli Tepe are actually documented to have been intentionally buried at some point after their construction. There is much more to say about Göbekli Tepe, and in another video we will take the time to dive deeper into this site. But as it relates to the handbag itself, the most interesting individual structure we have found at Göbekli Tepe is without a doubt what is known as Pillar 43. Among the many other important symbols and depictions in this pillar, you can clearly see 3 carved symbols into the top portion of this structure. These handbag-looking symbols do have their own unique physical properties, but the overall picture depicts a common thread that we can visually note: a rectangular lower body with an arched handle above it. According to the traditional consensus of what these symbols are trying to express, we simply just don't know. Göbekli Tepe is truly a site on its own. It sits far outside of what the current timeline allows, and its mysteries are far from being fully understood. However, some theories have been proposed, compelling ones I might add. Many have proposed that the symbols on Pillar 43, along with other uniquely aligned columns, describe a specific date in our past, the year 10,850 BCE. And coincidentally, that year just so happens to fall within the date range of the Younger Dryas, a catastrophic global event coinciding with dramatic and rapid climate change, along with the near extinction of all the megafauna. I honestly don't know if the handbag at Göbekli Tepe is even a handbag at all. But since we can see it there at the oldest megalithic construction site in the world, it is worth keeping in the back of our mind. This next example is different from Göbekli Tepe, and it comes from ancient Iraq. In Neo-Assyrian reliefs, winged figures known as the Apkallu carry the banduddu, which is usually translated as a bucket or purifier. Lucky for us, there are numerous carvings depicting the banduddu, and unsurprisingly, they look virtually the same as the other bucket or handbag images all over the world. In Mesopotamian tradition, the water inside the banduddu was not ordinary water at all. It was connected to sacred purification, and in many interpretations, it was also connected to the waters of Apsu, the cosmic subterranean freshwater ocean beneath the earth. The winged figures known as the Apkallu were divine or semi-divine sages connected to Enki, the god of wisdom, and they are remembered as beings who brought knowledge, order, and civilization to humanity before the Great Flood. To those of you that have been following these kinds of stories closely, you will instantly understand the parallel here. This is very similar to what we see in later biblical and apocryphal traditions, especially the Book of Enoch. In the Book of Enoch, a group of beings known as the Watchers descend upon the earth and teach humanity different forms of knowledge, metalworking, cosmetics, astronomy, even enchantments, and other forms of hidden knowledge that dramatically change the course of human civilization. And all of this occurs in what's known as the antediluvian world, or before the Great Flood. Now, it's difficult to know for sure which beings are which and whether or not we can confidently make exact parallels. But one thing is very clear. Ancient Mesopotamia has a memory of divine or semi-divine beings bringing knowledge before a massive flood, and the Enoch tradition preserves a similar memory of heavenly beings crossing the boundary between the divine world and humanity. Another important thing to note is that in most depictions of the handbag or bucket in Neo-Assyrian carvings, we will often see what appears to be a pine cone or some cone-like object incorporated into these scenes. This symbol does not appear in every culture, but it is known as the mulilu in Neo-Assyrian tradition. It is usually shown in the right hand, while the banduddu or handbag is in the left hand. So, to sum up this example, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was a formidable civilization, which thrived from roughly 900 to 600 BCE in modern-day northern Iraq. But the traditions they inherited were much older than that, reaching back into Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian mythology. Of course, the examples we've been discussing have been limited to Mesopotamia. Stories having a common ancestor in local context are not that difficult to imagine. However, the real kicker is that the handbag, along with many aspects of its mythology, doesn't just appear in Mesopotamia. In fact, it can be seen all the way in the Americas. Archaeology as a whole is very much against the idea that people from ancient Mesopotamia were traveling to the Americas. And frankly, I'm not saying they were. But to understand what I mean, we need to take a quick trip across the ocean. The Olmecs are often described as one of the earliest major civilizations in Mesoamerica. They flourished in what is now southern Mexico, long before the Aztec Empire and before the height of the Maya civilization. Many of the symbols that would later become central to Mesoamerican religions have some of their earliest foundations in the Olmec world. One of the most important examples is known as Olmec Monument 19 from La Venta, which usually dates somewhere between 900 and 400 BCE. If you look at this carving, you will clearly see a human-like figure positioned beneath what appears to be a feathered serpent, and in his hand, he appears to be holding a rectangular object with a handle on top, which gives the appearance of a handbag. Now, just like with every other example, there are local explanations. Some people say this is simply a pouch, and others say it must be a container for ritual materials. The problem is this: the idea that this handbag means anything outside of a local context is rarely ever considered. Most people that look at this are all operating under the understanding that these individual cultures were not linked in any way, which of course they can't actually prove. But because that is the assumption, the explanation must fit into that understanding. This Mesoamerican handbag appearance also continues later with the Toltec civilization at Tula in central Mexico. The Toltecs flourished roughly from 900 to 1168 CE, and they are often associated with the figure of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, who would later become one of the most important figures in Mesoamerican tradition. At Tula, we see the famous Atlantean figures, the massive warrior-like stone statues that are said to represent Quetzalcoatl. These figures are often shown with a small pouch or bag-like object, usually interpreted as a container for copal or sacred resin. Now, that interpretation is actually important because copal was connected to purification and divine communication. So, we are still continuing the same theme. These handbags show up in the ancient world. They are depicted as containing something sacred, and the carrier is never an ordinary person. Even when the examples are thousands of miles away or thousands of years apart, the meaning of the handbag remains consistent. It was carrying something sacred and could only be carried by someone who was worthy. This exact same point applies to ancient Egypt. Contrary to a lot of the internet fluff you might have seen, in Egypt we do not exactly see the same rectangular handbag form that we see in Assyria or Mesoamerica, but we do see sacred ritual vessels with arched handles, often carried by priests or gods. One of the most important examples is the Tula, a ritual vessel or bucket used for carrying sacred liquids. The Tula were sacred objects used in religious ceremonies. They were often decorated with divine imagery, and in most scenarios, as I said, they were used for purification or for carrying sacred liquids. When these Tula are paired beside Mesopotamian banduddu, from my perspective, there seems to be a connection here. Now, I want to throw out something important before we move on. You might be wondering how all of these handbags could be connected, when many of them clearly show unique differences. Whether it's a different ritual practice or a slightly different shape, there are differences. I'm not going to say there aren't, but to ignore the bigger pattern is equally as destructive as ignoring those minor differences. I don't believe in coincidence, and this is no exception. From my perspective, what we could be seeing here is a real memory that has been passed down in some form for at least a few thousand years, possibly more. Just like any memory, it is a game of telephone. Minor details change over time. They evolve into something new. Eventually, the true meaning of the memory is forgotten, and you are only left with a ritual or tradition. In the end, it all gets mythologized and turned into some obscure story that sounds like fantasy to most people. Whether it is a myth, a ritual, or a story, the important parts tend to keep their overall memory over time. One of the most fascinating examples is not even a carving at all, but an oral tradition from the Maori people of New Zealand. In Maori cosmology, the god Tain ascends to the highest heaven and returns with 3 baskets of knowledge. One basket contains practical knowledge, one contains spiritual or ritual knowledge, and the final one contains dangerous or forbidden knowledge. Specifically, the knowledge of good and evil. This becomes especially interesting when we remember that at Göbekli Tepe on Pillar 43, we also see 3 handbag symbols carved across the top of the pillar. When you start looking beyond simply the exact shape of the object, this same broader pattern appears in other places as well. In ancient India, we see the kamandalu, a handheld water vessel carried by sages, holy men, and deities. And in the giraffe culture of ancient Iran, we find carved chlorite vessels with mythological imagery, including serpents, composite beings, and flood-related symbolism. The other pattern here is knowledge. In many cases, the handbags are associated with different forms of knowledge that, according to the myths, are brought by divine beings. Whether it is the knowledge of various sciences or the knowledge of good and evil, this is a clear common thread. If you connect this to the various flood and cataclysm myths across the world, the story lines up quite nicely. There was a civilization many thousands of years ago, during which God sent angels, watchers, or sages to look over humanity and teach them the ways of civilization. Then, in almost every case, there is a conflict between God and the beings he sent to help humanity. Humanity becomes so corrupt, God is forced to send a flood. Some of the details are different, but there are too many similarities to rule out a connection between these cultures. The handbag is almost always seen as the container for something sacred, and as we've seen, it is often depicted as being brought by these divine or semi-divine beings after some sort of catastrophe upon the earth. It's hard to say what exactly is going on here, because some of the interpretations of these events are different in each story. For example, in the Book of Enoch and in the Bible, the Watchers, or divine beings that were sent by God, were actually considered to be rebels and to have caused harm to humanity by teaching us things we weren't ready to bear. However, in almost every other ancient tradition, these beings are considered as heroes and often represented as lowercase g gods. As I said, the handbag tends to appear with gods or priests of some kind, but it also strangely appears with serpents, as we see on Olmec Monument 19. From my perspective, there are striking parallels of this with the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. Adam and Eve lived in complete innocence and harmony with nature. God gave them complete freedom to eat from any tree in the garden, with one exception. They were forbidden to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, under penalty of death. A deceptive serpent approached Eve and questioned God's command, claiming that eating the fruit would not result in death, but would make them wise like God. Eve ate from the tree and also gave some to Adam. This pivotal act of disobedience is known as the fall of man. The Olmec Monument depicts a handbag that is generally associated with ritual and knowledge, and the carrier is often associated with a feathered serpent. In the Maori tradition, the third and final basket contains dangerous or forbidden knowledge. In many of these cultures, the handbag appears beside sacred trees, in rituals of purification, and in stories of knowledge brought from heaven. It's difficult to not get lost in the details. They can easily be confusing, but if we look at the bigger patterns, we can try to piece things together as best we can. When you're dealing with thousands and thousands of years between you and the events these handbags are connected to, we have to look at it from a higher vantage point. Otherwise, we probably won't get anywhere. Before we can ask what the handbag actually was, we have to deal with the obvious problem that almost nobody seems willing to address. Each culture has its own local explanation, but what if those local explanations are not separate from each other? What if they are fragments of a much older memory that each culture preserved in its own language? To me, that is the real handbag mystery. The handbag may not be the final answer. Instead, it may be one of the clearest remaining symbols of a much older memory, where humanity remembered receiving knowledge or divine instruction from beings beyond ordinary human life. So when people tell me all of this is a coincidence, I just don't buy it. The differences are exactly what we should expect after thousands of years, and the similarities are precisely what demand an explanation. And from my perspective, the explanation is not that every culture randomly imagined the same thing for no reason. The explanation is that something real sits behind the memory, something old, something fragmented, something that was preserved in different forms across the world. And the ancient handbag might just be one of those surviving clues that points back to what actually happened. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and comment your thoughts down below. And if you like these types of videos, feel free to subscribe. But yeah, I will see you in the next one. Peace.